From that moment on, an age of great amnesia began. Humanity had just endured the bloodiest conflict in its existence. Yet, instead of reflection, it received a script. A carefully staged, emotionally flawless, politically convenient script. The Second World War became not only a tragedy, but also a theater. One where the victors assigned the roles and the audience was taught whom to applaud. In textbooks, films, newspapers, and even school poems, a new pantheon of holy liberators emerged. Franklin Roosevelt, the fighter for democracy. Winston Churchill, the symbol of resilience. Joseph Stalin, the father of nations who saved the world from Nazism. 3 shining knights against 1 dragon. That was the version of history the world was meant to remember. But the truth is always more complicated and far more frightening. Behind the curtains of this theater stood another story, one made of fear, manipulation, and cold calculation. Back in the 1920s, after the First World War, the United States experienced a brief moment of honesty. People dared to look in the mirror and admit their first crusade for democracy had brought not peace, but new empires, new deaths, new millions of graves. Historians back then spoke the truth, bitter, unpleasant, but cleansing. 2 decades later, everything changed. The Second War, far more destructive, had a different purpose, not just to defeat an enemy, but to create a legend, a history with no doubts, a world where evil was absolute and good unquestionable. When the bombs fell over Pearl Harbor in December 1941, America awoke not only to war, it awoke to a new reality. President Roosevelt's famous Day of Infamy speech became the moral anthem of a generation. From that day forward, every American was to believe truth stands with the flag. Doubt is treason. And so began the largest information campaign of the 20th century. History itself became a weapon. Thousands of journalists, writers, historians, artists, even Hollywood screenwriters were enlisted to craft a grand moral mythology of war. In that mythology, America was the liberator, the USSR a temporary ally, Europe a grateful pupil, and the rest of the world a silent audience. Those who dared to ask why quietly vanished from the headlines, the lecture halls, and the airwaves. They were labeled enemy sympathizers or paranoids. Thus, historical honesty began to die. Historians who once exposed the propaganda of the First World War now became its architects. They worked in government offices, wrote speeches, compiled official chronicles. They meant well, but as always, the road to oblivion is paved with good intentions. Many of them sincerely believed they were defending truth. But with each passing year, that truth grew smoother, more convenient, stripped of its doubts, stripped of its conscience. Those who still dared to think differently knew silence was the price of survival. Because after 1945, the world was divided not only into East and West, it was divided by 2 versions of truth. Each camp built its own history, and both shared one common feature, a lie disguised as heroism. In the United States, the cult of liberation. In the Soviet Union, the cult of the sacred victory. Between them, silence. A silence in which millions of voices disappeared. Deported, shot, burned in villages, erased in camps, wiped from archives. After 1945, Western historiography was no longer a science. It became part of the political machine, just like Soviet historiography. Ideology triumphed over history. From then on, truth was no longer defined by documents, but by conference communiques. Not by evidence, but by press releases. Not by scholars, but by victors. History became a moral code, one that could not be questioned. Decades passed, and this new reality became normal. Textbooks repeated the same formula. The Second World War was a struggle of civilization against barbarism. But remove the pathos, and another picture appears. A struggle of empires for resources, influence, and the shape of the coming world order. Millions of dead turned into statistics. necessary for the political narrative. When the war ended, the real war began, the war for memory. And today, when we turn the pages of official history, we no longer see events, we see edited versions. Deleted paragraphs, forgotten documents, simplified schemes. We know who won, but we don't know what was buried along with the truth. The Second World War was not only a battlefield of nations, it was the moment when humanity collectively agreed that truth could be a weapon, not a goal. History did not die from bullets, it was suffocated by applause. Wars do not end when the guns fall silent, but when the last witness silently agrees with the official version. After 1945, the world entered a new era, the era of moral triumph. The victors not only won the war, they privatized memory. Everything that was complex, ambiguous, or inconvenient was labeled irrelevant. Everything that didn't fit the simple scheme of heroes versus evil was thrown into the trash bin of history. The squares of Europe filled with fanfares. In Hollywood, they were already filming stories of Allied bravery. In Moscow, mosaics of heroes of the front appeared. In London, memoirs about the unbroken spirit of the empire were being published. The world celebrated victory, but beneath the fanfare, faint cries could be heard, the voices of those who were never invited to the parade, the witnesses who had seen another war. True war is not just battles, it is a chaos of compromises, political deals, betrayals, silences that never reach textbooks. Those who knew too much, who saw good and evil trading masks, became shadows. After the war, many officers, journalists, even diplomats tried to speak, but their voices were drowned out by the new moral symphony. When newspapers wrote of the liberation of Paris, no one asked about the raped cities of Eastern Europe. When Nuremberg was celebrated, no one mentioned the firebombing of Dresden, the annihilation of peaceful towns that had no strategic purpose. When they praised the Allied ideals, no one asked why half of Europe ended up behind the Iron Curtain. Thus was born the myth of liberation. It became the new religion of the West, where the sin of doubt was punished by oblivion. Hollywood cemented the image of the righteous war, where every American soldier fought not by command, but for the freedom of mankind. Magazines printed smiling nurses, kind generals, and clean bombers. Posters showed armies bringing peace, even as behind the scenes of liberation came thousands of executions, deportations, and looting. The Soviet version mirrored it. There too, a myth was built, only under another flag. The Great Patriotic War became a sacred ritual, not a tragedy. There was no room for criticism, doubt, or acknowledgement of one's own crimes. History became a catechism and truth a heresy. And so two worlds, East and West, met in one thing. Both needed legends, not truth. Because legends are convenient. They don't ask hard questions. They have no corpses, only symbols. But corpses are the true face of war. Not parades, not medals, not speeches, but bodies. Civilians, soldiers, children. Bodies lying in the ruins of Berlin, Hiroshima, Kharkiv, Warsaw. Silent witnesses that no holy war is ever pure. Propaganda taught humanity not to see. It created a new morality. Our mistakes are necessity, theirs are crimes. Thus, the concepts of objectivity, empathy, and remorse disappeared. In the post-1945 world, the comfort of memory became more important than truth. In the United States, any mention of Allied war crimes was called Soviet disinformation. In the USSR, any mention of Red Army atrocities was fascist propaganda. History lost the language of truth, leaving only two forms, heroic and forbidden. Witnesses fell silent, some out of fear, others out of shame, others because no one wanted to listen anymore. Humanity chose oblivion, because oblivion is easier. It asks no questions. It allows one to build a new world without clearing the ruins. But truth is not ruin. It is a shard of a mirror. And if you look closely, in that shard, you can see everyone. Those who saved, those who burned, and those who kept silent. The myth of liberation gave people hope, but took away their memory. And until that memory returns, history will remain a film, with roles assigned, scenes approved, and real witnesses edited out of the montage. The guns fell silent, but the tension did not. The world stood still, not in peace, but in suspension. The victors no longer fought on battlefields. They fought in laboratories, in boardrooms, in radio waves. The age of explosions gave way to the age of anxiety. Every man, woman, and child lived beneath an invisible sky of fear, the mushroom-shaped halo of progress. They called it the balance of power. But it was not balance, it was paralysis. The Cold War, they said, was a confrontation of ideas. Capitalism versus communism, freedom versus tyranny. But beneath the slogans lay something older, colder, the eternal hunger for control. Two systems mirrored each other like reflections in a dark mirror. Both promised a radiant future. Both feared their own people. Both built walls of ideology, of iron, of silence. The United States became the empire of comfort. The USSR became the empire of sacrifice. And both sold the same product, obedience. Television replaced thought. Slogans replaced questions. The word peace became the most dangerous weapon because it was spoken by those who built missiles. Fear became global, institutional, rationalized. Children learned to hide under desks from bombs that would turn cities into vapor. Scientists designed annihilation with mathematical precision. Politicians smiled on screens, preaching stability while testing weapons under the earth. Humanity learned to live with the apocalypse as a neighbor, polite, invisible, always near. The cold peace was not peace at all. It was a global hypnosis, a fragile illusion maintained by terror. And those who tried to speak of it were dismissed as dreamers or traitors. Yet beneath the propaganda, people began to sense the truth, that the world had not been saved in 1945. It had only been postponed. Progress became an idol. The machine replaced morality. The future was no longer a promise, it was a threat. Technology advanced faster than conscience. The same factories that built bombers now built computers. The same logic that divided Europe now divided the human mind into data, into consumption, into obedience. In this new world, individuality became dangerous. To ask why became subversive. The dream of liberation had turned into a cage with velvet walls. The cold peace demanded silence, not agreement. Survival replaced meaning. Humanity had defeated fascism, but not its shadow. The system that rose from the ruins learned its lessons well. Control the story, and you control reality. And so history continued, polished, revised, simplified. The victors became teachers. The victims became footnotes. Memory turned into entertainment. War became cinema. Truth became opinion. Empires no longer needed armies, only narratives. But even in this world of controlled memory, the truth still flickers. In archives, in letters, in the silence between official lines. It waits, patient as dust, knowing that no wall of propaganda can stand forever. For every myth eventually collapses under the weight of its own perfection. And when it does, humanity will face its reflection and see not heroes or villains, but itself. The Cold Peace did not end the war. It only made the world forget that it was still fighting. The most dangerous dictatorship is not built with prisons, but with stories everyone agrees to believe. The 20th century ended not with an explosion, but with applause. The victors of the Cold War stood before the cameras, declaring the dawn of a new world order. Democracy had triumphed, markets had opened, and ideology, they said, was dead. Humanity was finally free. But in that freedom, something vital disappeared: memory. The world no longer wanted to remember, only to move on. The ruins were cleared, the archives sealed, the monuments polished. History was now a product, digestible, profitable, easily edited. The past was repackaged into television series, school textbooks, and glossy documentaries, where every tear was perfectly timed and every villain conveniently defeated. The horror of the century became entertainment. The tragedies of millions turned into background music for a comfortable world. Never again, they said, while building new weapons, new wars, new lies. The lesson of the 20th century was not learned, it was monetized. Forgetting became policy. The new elite understood memory is dangerous. It questions, it resists. It connects crimes to faces, dates, and decisions. A society without memory is easy to rule. It doesn't argue, it consumes. And so began the quietest war in human history, the war against remembering. It needed no armies, only screens. Every second of distraction, every viral clip, every slogan was another bullet fired at reflection. People stopped asking where the truth was. They started asking what was trending. The past became obsolete, like an old program. The digital age arrived, and with it, a new type of control. Not censorship, but overflow. Too much information, too many versions, too much noise. The truth drowned not in lies, but in data. No one needed to erase history anymore. It simply vanished beneath the flood of everything else. Post-truth, they called it. But it was only the next stage of an old disease, the fear of remembering. Because memory hurts. It breaks illusions. It reminds us that every comfort we enjoy was built on someone else's ashes, that every piece was paid for by those who never saw it. And so the modern world built its temple on forgetfulness. Social media replaced confession. Algorithms replaced archives. Propaganda no longer shouted, it whispered in recommendations. Each generation forgot a little more, until forgetting became normal. Until people began to mistake nostalgia for history. The same nations that once fought for truth now exported forgetfulness as culture, packaged in movies, in fashion, in advertising. Memory became aesthetic, not moral. It was allowed to exist only if it entertained. Museums turned into spectacles. History turned into content. The dead became decorations for the living. And yet, beneath this glittering surface, something still resists. A fragment of conscience that refuses to fade. Every document preserved, every testimony whispered, every unedited photograph. They are small acts of rebellion, because remembering is resistance. Memory is the last battlefield. When the official stories crumble, it will be memory, raw, painful, imperfect, that brings truth back into the light. The age of forgetting will end not with revelation, but with recognition. That we have been here before, repeating the same mistakes under different flags, in different languages, with the same silence. The opposite of truth is not lies, it is indifference. When the last witness dies, history becomes whatever the living can bear to remember.